Quel odeur.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate, it's become a global environmental scourge.
I'm surprised how bad it can be. I've never seen things like this before.
Plastic, mountains of plastic, overproduced in the developed world, dumped in countries least equipped to deal with it. Tonight, a Fifth Estate Radio-Canada investigation reveals where much of what we think we're recycling really ends up, and why Canada is a major culprit.
I hope that makes citizens of the Canadians angry as well, of this irresponsible export of plastic or waste.
As some attempt to fight back.
I really want you to stop export your plastic waste to Indonesia.
And they're saying, why should we be the dumping ground for places like Canada? How do you answer them?
I totally agree.
Canada's environment minister, once famously punished for his own activism, struggles to do what he knows is right.
It won't happen tomorrow morning, but that's what I'm working on. That's what my government is working on. This has to stop. I totally agree.
I'm Gillian Findlay. For decades in this country, recycling has been another word for good citizenship. We sort our waste, teach our kids to use the blue bins, believing we're doing our part to help the environment. But where do all those empty milk bags and plastic wrappings end up? Well, tonight the answer takes us overseas, to places where our garbage is harming other people's environments, and where the words Canadian recycling have become toxic. This is the Fifth Estate.
This is also cardboard.
Yeah, it looks the same amount of things. The city should take care of that.
I think this should go in there, yeah.
Willa Vipon and her sister Sadie have been avid recyclers for as long as they can remember.
Like maybe this will be turned into new cardboard or I don't know. It's cool that it'll be reused.
But at 14 and 16, they've been around long enough to know that not everything they throw away is headed for new life. Like all that plastic they see at their local grocery store.
So these are recyclable, but this is a total waste of plastic. Yeah, and even these little top things are made from plastic.
They're savvy enough to look for the little triangle that's supposed to tell consumers what's recyclable and what's just garbage.
This is recycling. It doesn't.
But even for these seasoned environmentalists, it's confusing.
Should we recycle this? We recycle the other one.
Yeah, then we should recycle it.
What happens next for most Canadians is even more mysterious. The contents of our blue bins are collected and dumped and sorted. 3.3 million tons of plastic a year. But here's the first dirty little secret about Canadian recycling. Less than 10% of all that plastic ever gets recycled. Most of it ends up in landfills and incinerators, and too often directly in the environment itself. Plastics don't decompose. Toxins leach into streams and rivers, affecting food chains and eventually make their way to the oceans. Today, there are entire islands floating in our oceans, hundreds of kilometers in size, made up of nothing but plastic.
We have the equivalent of one dump truck every minute of plastic waste being dumped into our oceans. We might have more plastics in our oceans than fish by 2050 by weight.
Justin Trudeau's Liberals came to power promising to lead the world in fixing the plastics problem.
5 of us also agreed to a plastics charter, which speaks to our common resolve to eradicate plastic pollution.
Announcements were made.
This is an important step towards achieving a life cycle economy in which all plastics would be recycled and repurposed.
Bans were implemented.
The ban is really on those things that are very difficult to recycle, and therefore we feel that they should be taken out of circulation.
Stephen Guilbeault, Canada's latest environment minister, continues the long Liberal tradition of promising better.
I mean, we're only recycling 9% of plastics in Canada. This makes no sense. And we have an objective of being zero plastic waste in Canada. And that's what we're working to do, to stop this.
The government's strategy is twofold. Get Canadians to use less plastic. Get companies and municipalities to recycle more. Canada has a large recycling industry, but not all of our plastic stays here. Dirty little secret number 2. Last fall, colleagues at the Radio-Canada program Enquête got a tip that Canadian plastic waste was being shipped around the world to places like India. And that is where their investigation began.
We now shift our focus to the Indian capital, where more than 20 million people continue to breathe in toxic air.
3 hours outside India's capital is the city of Muzaffarnagar, the center of India's paper recycling industry. Here, air looks like soup.
For the last few weeks, a thick blanket of smog had residents complaining of allergies, watery eyes, and even respiratory illnesses.
But the smog from Muzaffarnagar's more than 30 mills is not just the result of recycling paper. Hidden among the bales of paper the mills import is plastic waste. A little bit of plastic is permissible, but here our colleagues found mountains of it that had a very Canadian feel. A clothing store bag from Quebec City. Another from Indigo. Cat food packaging with the label President's Choice.
Ah non, c'est de la nourriture pour chat, the President's Choice.
Plastic milk bags, so common in much of Canada, were everywhere.
Et qu'on reconnaît facilement, le lait qui est bon.
There was trash from Europe and the United States as well, but most of what they discovered was distressingly familiar. Even a blue recycling bag from the city of Toronto. The plastic is what's left after the mills take out the paper they recycle. Local residents are then hired to sort through the waste. People like these women.
So, can you explain to me the work that you do here? What do you do?
कचरे में करते हैं जी काम।
क्या काम करते हैं आप? जैसे यहाँ आते हैं तो क्या करते हैं?
प्लास्टिक चिपता है जी, डिबली निकालते हैं, सिल्वर।
Can you tell me how much you can earn every day?
200 rupees, just over $3 a day, to separate hard plastic like bottles, which can be sold to other recyclers, from soft plastic like bags, which can't be recycled. Occasionally, there's even a souvenir, further evidence of where all that waste has come from.
This is from Canada. And this is from the United States. America.
The women said they didn't know what happened to all the soft plastic they collected. But a guard for the mills said at least some went back to the recycling plants to be burned as fuel.
He's saying they burn it in the boiler.
Burn it in the boiler, okay.
Burning plastic is toxic, illegal in India, but it's also cheap. Which means it's not just the mills that burn it. The black smoke on the horizon is from a village that makes candy, mom-and-pop operations. Where once again, the team from Enquête found plastic used as fuel.
So what they do is they take wood and they take the plastic and they burn it together.
Oh yeah, is this legal to burn the plastic like that with the wood? No. But people do it anyway.
Needless to say, the residue from all the burning ends up everywhere. And so does what's in the wastewater. A few kilometers away, you can smell the stench from this canal. The mills dump their waste. And these women say it's the people who get sick.
और गैस बनता है, गैस दवाई खाते भी आराम नहीं है, परेशानी नाले की वजह से, नाले की वजह से.
In one village, they've started to document their illnesses and showed the journalists a thick file of medical reports, asthma, skin diseases, and cancers.
Yeah, you've been collecting a lot, huh?
They like that they never smoke बीड़ी, cigarette, and they are very मतलब गंभीर हैं, बहुत क्रिटिकल कंडीशंस हैं. ऐसे लोगों को तो बेसिकली बिकॉज़ ऑफ एयर पोल्यूशन से.
Pulmonary problem.
Pollution, they are convinced, is linked to all that plastic, so much of which comes from Canada.
So this is my letter.
When we come back, a plea to Canada's Prime Minister.
Dear Prime Minister, why do you send your trash to my country? You should take care of your own trash in your own country.
This is the Brantas River in Indonesia, where the fight against plastic waste is being waged by children.
When I was very young, when I was a little girl, I lived in front of the river, and my parents usually take me to the river to go to swim with my friends, with my sisters. But the river is still so clean, not as dirty as right now.
Nina Azara is 14. She and her friends make regular trips to the river to collect the plastic that litters its shores.
Yeah, because river is very important. We drink from this river water, and river is also home for a lot of fish. And we eat those fish. Oh, bisa! Bisa! Wow!
The daughter of a well-known environmentalist, Nina has become a star in her own right, live streaming today's cleanup to more than 30,000 followers on Instagram.
Like plastic bags, straw, styrofoam, they will break down to tiny pieces called microplastic. And microplastic is very dangerous for our health because microplastic is like magnet. They will absorb pollutions in the river.
Like the Muzaffarnagar region in India, this part of Indonesia is home to paper recycling mills. And as in India, the bales of paper they import often arrive laced with cheap, unrecyclable plastic.
So the paper mills in Indonesia, they buy paper waste from developed countries, but the developed countries, they smuggle their plastic waste to Indonesia because they know that recycling plastic is very difficult and expensive, yeah. So that's why they just smuggle it to Indonesia.
It didn't used to be that way here. For years, China was the world's biggest recycling market, until it got fed up with all the unrecyclable junk the world sent it.
The environmental repercussions were obvious in China. There was so much waste going there, and a lot of it wasn't usable.
So in 2018, China said enough and banned all recycling imports. It was a game changer.
It had an immense impact on the recycling industry. So all of a sudden, the recycling, exporters had to find different places to divert their waste shipments. And what happened was that those waste exports that were going to China just ended up going to other places in Southeast Asia.
It triggered a race to the bottom, until countries at the bottom also started fighting back.
Tons of rotting Canadian garbage could be on its way here as early as this month after an embarrassing political standoff.
In the Philippines, shipments labeled as Canadian recycling turned out to be rotting, stinking garbage, which set off an even stinkier diplomatic fight. Protesters took to the streets, allowing the country's notorious strongman to seize the moral high ground.
I will advise Canada that your garbage is on the way. Prepare a grand reception. Eat it if you want to.
I don't think threats are particularly helpful, but we do take the issue seriously. I think that there is a solution that can be found in the coming weeks.
The solution in the end was that Canada would have to take the garbage back.
So made in Canada, it says there. That's an Ontario company.
But that didn't stop the exports. Shipments of Canadian waste would also be seized in Cambodia, Indonesia, and in Malaysia, where the Minister of Environment herself scolded Canadians for the contaminated waste they sent.
I hope that makes citizens of the Canadians angry as well of this irresponsible export of plastic or waste.
In Indonesia, Nina was front and center of protests. Demonstrations across Asia drove a message that eventually exporting countries could no longer ignore.
This will be the world's first legally binding agreement on plastic waste, agreed by 187 parties with global.
In 2019 in Switzerland, the world came together to agree new rules for plastic waste, including greater oversight of exports. 187 countries signed on to what would be known as the Basel Plastic Amendment. 187, but not Canada.
Canadians expect that their government will take important actions that are required to protect their environment.
Instead of banning exports, the government continued its plan to reduce plastic consumption at home, one drinking straw at a time.
The proposed ban will address plastic checkout bags, straws, stir sticks, six-pack rings, cutlery, and foodware made from hard-to-recycle plastics, particularly expanded polystyrene.
Plastic pollution is a global challenge. You've all heard the stories and seen the photos. And to be honest, as a dad, it's tough trying to explain this to my kids.
Despite his parental concerns, it would take Trudeau's government 2 years to sign on to those Basel rules, all the while telling Canadians it was their responsibility to do more.
Maybe you're camping or cottaging, canoeing or fishing. Now imagine those memories punctuated by dead birds or fish, or maybe a pile of coffee lids and shopping bags covering the ground or floating all around you. That's the reality for our kids if we don't act now.
But what about the millions of kids for whom it's already a reality that Canada helped create?
This is only consumed by 1%.
1%, yeah.
In Indonesia, as part of their campaign, Nina and her dad have built a monument to what they call Western hypocrisy. A tunnel of all the plastic bottles they've collected. A house made entirely of plastic bags.
This is 2,000 of plastic bags that one person produced in 2 years.
To record our camera?
Okay, sure, we will.
Okay, thank you.
We talked with Nina from a museum they built to educate the world about the damage the plastic's doing.
To be real evidence, you know, the evidence that the developed countries smuggle their plastic waste to Indonesia.
So all that waste that I see behind you on the wall, where does all that come from?
Mostly it's from European countries, USA, Canada, Australia.
Yeah. 2 years ago, Nina decided to appeal to leaders of those countries directly. She wrote personal letters and was invited on Indonesian television to read the one she wrote to Justin Trudeau.
Mr. Justin Trudeau, I'm Ais Nina Azahra. You can call me Nina. I'm 12 years old, student from Gresik, East Java, Indonesia. I want to tell you about your trash. Why do you send your trash to my country? You should take care of your own trash in your country. I'm asking you to stop sending your dirty plastic trash to Indonesia.
The publicity turned into a following, and Nina got responses to her letters, meetings with ambassadors from the Netherlands, Germany, and Australia. And yet, despite a follow-up letter to Canada's Prime Minister last summer, when we talked to Nina, she had yet to hear anything from Ottawa.
I already tell them to please answer my letter, but until now, there's still no answer.
When we come back,
Greenpeace is climbing the world's tallest building today to tell the world not to be fooled by the Liberal government.
A former activist becomes a Liberal government minister. In their fight for the environment, Canada's Liberals could not have found a more credible candidate than the man in this video.
Christine, à 4 heures du matin, ces deux individus ont commencé
déployer une
l'escalade.
bannière protestant contre le réchauffement de la planète.
20 years ago, as an activist, Stephen Guilbeault famously scaled Toronto's CN Tower to protest Canada's inaction on climate change and was arrested.
Greenpeace is climbing the world's tallest building today to tell the world not to be fooled by the Liberal government. I, Stephen Guilbeault, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully...
Today, Guilbeault is part of the Liberal government. Within days of being sworn in as Justin Trudeau's latest environment minister, he was off to his coming out party at the World's Environment Summit in Glasgow. Plastic waste was on the agenda, he told us, as he assured us that he too is troubled by how much Canadian plastic ends up overseas.
I totally agree. And those regulations that we will be adopting in Canada will help us prevent that.
When?
It won't happen tomorrow morning, but that's what I'm working on. That's what my government is working on. This has to stop. I totally agree.
But at the same time Guilbeault's department was preparing his trip to Glasgow, 20 containers of so-called green waste were making their own voyage across the Atlantic, from Canada headed for India, with a transit stop at the Belgian port of Antwerp.
Il y a probablement un problème parce que l'oxygène est très, très, très bas.
That's where our colleagues at Radio-Canada, acting on a tip, caught up with the shipment and watched as a Belgian port inspector made a shocking discovery.
Ah, quelle odeur. Ah, ça pue vraiment.
Inside the container labeled recyclable paper was hidden an awful lot of non-recyclable waste.
At first sight, I thought, where is the paper? Because I saw so much plastics and other...
So this is not normal?
This is absolutely not normal. It's the worst that I have seen in the whole of my career. And yeah, it's really very, very, very bad. Nearly impossible to recycle this.
So where did the waste come from? It took our colleagues a bit of sleuthing, but eventually they traced it to Montreal, to a company with a contract to recycle what's in the city's blue bins. Rakova refused to answer our questions about how the waste ended up overseas. To Radio-Canada, they said they didn't believe the Belgian inspectors had found a problem.
Mais c'est pas un contaminant, c'est peut-être un scatta ou peut-être c'est I don't know, un carton de lait. C'est toutes des affaires que peut-être ils vont monter le volume.
We can see some of this.
Under the Basel rules, it's the importing country that sets contamination limits. India says nothing more than 2%. The waste in this shipment, according to De Strooper, was more than 10 times that. And it's not the first time he's had problems with Canada. Each time it happens, he warns Environment Canada and starts the process of forcing companies to take their garbage back. But his inspections are random, and he says companies know it.
I suppose the risk that they get caught is for them very low. If they send 500 containers and we stop only 20, for them it's nothing.
We're externalizing pollution, which means that waste that we can't handle at home, we're simply exporting.
Environmental lawyer Saba Khan says it comes down to money. Dealing with our waste ourselves is just more expensive.
It is more costly to recycle, it's more costly to landfill, it's more costly to incinerate. And so that's how the economics come in. It's just simply cheaper to export than to process waste at home.
But if that means companies are incentivized to export waste, isn't it up to Canadian authorities to make sure they don't? In theory, says Saba Khan, but not in practice.
Even exports that are already flagged as potentially dangerous or high risk, 1/3 of them are actually not inspected.
Do you think that's why so much Canadian waste is landing in places where it shouldn't be?
It's absolutely having an impact because the Canadian government has decided that it won't, monitor plastic waste very closely.
Why on earth are we relying on Belgian port authorities to discover this? Why is this not stopped in Canada before those exports go out?
From an environmental perspective, it's always more difficult to deal with a problem once it's being created. So end of pipe environmental solutions are always really, really complicated. And what we're doing right now is to really shift the approach in Canada, and when it comes to plastic waste specifically, from dealing with the problem at the end, from trying to tackle the problem at the very beginning. So we don't, and companies don't try to export this plastic waste.
But leaving it up to companies isn't working, says MP Scott Davidson, and it's not good enough.
So those are the officials. This is what brings everyone out here.
He's a conservative from the rural Ontario riding of York Simcoe, who's appalled that any Canadian garbage is exported.
And Canada has to take responsibility. We just can't, lob our garbage over the fence to our neighbors and say out of sight, out of mind. It's getting to the point now something had to be done.
So Davidson wrote a private member's bill to ban exports of plastic waste. And Davidson being Davidson, he did it with aplomb.
The honourable member for York Simcoe.
Another broken promise from a government that...
Zooming into the House of Commons in hip waders from the waters of Lake Simcoe itself.
More needs to be done on the environment. Canadians are also looking for meaningful action on plastic waste.
I'm not quite sure about the backdrop being parliamentary, but we'll move on.
The problem I was trying to fix is I wanted Canada to become a leader and an innovator and get out in front of our plastics issues. So my bill specifically focused on the not allowing, especially to the third world, which we've seen, plastic for final disposal to be exported.
To Davidson, it just seemed obvious, and he didn't have much trouble drumming up political support. Every party agreed to back his bill, except one.
There was 2 Liberals, one at second reading and one at final reading, that broke with ranks and voted for it.
But nobody else?
Nobody else. And again, I hate to be partisan, but sometimes, you have to be. This is all talk, no action. The Liberals proclaim to be, the party of the environment.
But just help me understand why. Why do you think the Liberals, the champions of the environment, didn't support it?
Because basically a party makes a position in National Caucus, and basically everyone has to fall into line. It was almost like they didn't want to, the Conservatives to have a win on the environment, so we're not going to vote for this bill. And
so it wasn't the substance of the bill, you don't think?
No.
It was simply the fact that a Conservative member had brought it forward?
That's what I think it is at the end of the day.
I would disagree with that characterization. I work with members of the opposition from every party every week, and I get along with a number of them.
Did you speak to Mr. Davidson about his bill?
No, I wasn't environment minister at the time.
But you didn't support it?
I was heritage minister, so I was on a different file. But this idea. No, I agree. We did for reasons.
But you didn't support it. You could have voted for it. It was a private member's bill, right?
Well, I mean, as you know, our political system doesn't really work this way. Certainly, as a cabinet minister, things are different.
But it would have been a step. It would have been a signal. It would have been the government.
We are banning. We're banning plastic substances in Canada. We are doing that. We are tackling this problem. This idea that because we didn't vote in favor of that bill, we don't want to tackle the problem is simply not true.
We'll now proceed to the vote. We will start with the sponsor of the item.
Mr. Davidson.
Even without Liberal support, Davidson's bill passed the House of Commons last June.
Yeas pour 179, 179.
And moved to the Senate. He had the votes, he says, but just before the bill could have become law, Justin Trudeau announced a snap election. Davidson's bill, like all bills left on the order paper, was dead in the water.
And the unfortunate part, when the election was called, it died in the Senate. It was 15 minutes away from becoming a law. And, unfortunately, I think, the world's oceans are going to suffer because of that delay now.
When we come back, who are the companies smuggling our plastic waste?
Why are we protecting these companies from the public?
I can only tell you what is possible within the realm of the laws that we have at Environment Canada.
I just feel kind of lied to.
There's no debate that plastic is helping to destroy our environment. For years, developed countries like Canada have allowed shipments of plastic waste to be dumped in developing countries. Last October, colleagues from the Radio-Canada program Enquête tracked 20 containers of plastic-contaminated paper from Canada destined for India and intercepted in Belgium. Port Inspector Mark de Strooper was the man who discovered the illegal shipment. In January, with our cameras rolling, he discovered more.
It's really completely full of metal and plastic. You see, I did 5 minutes selection and I already have a mountain of plastics, aluminium. In October, we found a shipment of 20 containers with paper waste from Canada. And after that, we did find 5 other illegal shipments coming from Canada.
5 more since
October. So that's really a lot, because it's in total, it's more than 50 containers.
What does that say to you, the fact that, you know, in just 3 months or 3.5 months, you found 5 more examples of this in a random inspection?
For me, it's a sign that that we really have to try to stop this as much as possible, to change something at the source, because if Canada does not change its policy or his habits around this, it will continue.
De Strooper's practice is to work with Canada's government and the shipping companies to send illegal cargo back. But what happens when they do, and who's held responsible? It turns out that information is secret.
Do you know the name of the Canadian company? Can you tell us that?
No, I cannot go into details about this. I'm not allowed to do this.
Environment Canada won't identify offending companies either. They did tell us that in the last 5 years, 123 shipping containers have been returned to Canada. As for penalties linked to waste exports, there were 9 warnings and a grand total of 6 fines, adding up to just $9,000. When we asked who was fined, they again told us none of our business.
Why are we protecting these companies from the public?
Well, I mean, you have to understand that the enforcement branch of Environment Canada is not a court of justice. So we can issue fine, but in terms of communicating this information publicly, there is still in our legal system this provision that you're innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. We're not.
But if you've decided to fine them, you've decided there's some cause. Why can I, as a Canadian, not know which companies?
I can only tell you what is possible within the realm of the laws that we have at Environment Canada and the regulations that we have, and we can't make those names public.
There's just simply no transparency, and if there's no transparency, there can't be any accountability either. And so that's the most frustrating part.
While de Strooper couldn't tell us the names of companies, he did tell us the names of cities where the waste originated: Montreal, Toronto, and Calgary.
Well, we can't force something to stretch the
Calgary, where Sadie and Willa Vipon live and do their best to recycle.
My friend takes them and then she can recycle them because the city does a special program. Well, that's so cool.
There's no reason Willa and Sadie would have any idea that plastic waste from their city, maybe even from their blue bins, was being smuggled to India. And so we told them.
The inspectors in Europe, again, they found new shipments from Canada, and they're from Calgary.
Even after the letters?
They're from Calgary. They found Calgary paper waste that's actually garbage.
Well, at least I am like mad and just so sad that people would do this. So why are they showing us these videos in school about what's supposed to happen after you recycle something and it just being a myth? I don't know. I just feel kind of lied to, personally.
From Calgary to Indonesia, it's young people who will inherit our toxic legacy. Nina began her campaign to stop exports as a 12-year-old. 2 years later, she has a worldwide following and some significant wins.
Diaper waste.
Germany, the Netherlands, and Australia have all done what she asked, taking responsibility for their waste.
Today, we passed legislation that begins the ban of export of our waste overseas. It's our waste, it's our problem, we have to deal with it.
In fact, since adopting those Basel rules on plastic waste, more than 100 countries have signed on to a new amendment banning exports to the developing world completely. More than 100 countries, but not Canada. Environmental groups practically beg the government to sign on. Shipping our waste halfway around the world, allegedly for recycling, they wrote, is a practice that is neither environmentally responsible nor just. Among the signatories was Greenpeace, where Stephen Guilbeault spent 10 years fighting for what he thought was just. Now, as Environment Minister, he's on the defensive.
How is it that more than 100 countries can come together and agree to ban the export of plastic waste to developing nations, and Canada is not among them?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but the way we've looked at this is through our domestic policies and through the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, where we've given ourselves tools to try and curtail this problem.
But the problem has become international. Canada's a culprit here. You admit that, right?
Oh yeah, and we need to do better, and which is why we've announced we're banning a certain number of plastic substance in Canada. We're working to ensure that companies that produce plastics are more responsible.
But if I'm sitting in Indonesia or Malaysia or India or somewhere like that, and I'm seeing this stuff come in, and I'm seeing it in my landfill sites, and I know it's being incinerated, and people are linking this to health problems, I don't really care about what you're doing here in Canada. I want you to stop sending it to me. That's what these countries are saying. How do you answer them?
I totally agree. I mean, it's about managing waste in Canada, but it's about ensuring we're stopping to export this waste in developing countries. I totally agree.
But if you don't have a ban, how are you stopping to export it?
By making companies more responsible for what they're producing.
Make it harder for them to export it. Make the penalties stronger for them to export it. Is that it?
But most of the measures the Liberals have announced won't even kick in till next year. And in the meantime, the plastic waste continues to flow.
As a Canadian, as a human being, I'm angry. As a global citizen, I'm angry.
What makes you angry?
We live in one of the most technologically advanced, richest societies. There's no reason that we should be exporting our wastes. But at the end of the day, this is simply, a lack of political will on Canada's part. The European Union, for instance, has adopted the Basel ban, which explicitly prohibits European countries from exporting hazardous waste to non-OECD countries. Canada has adamantly refused to do so.
We've seen the harms of toxic smoke from the burning of this plastic. Once you dump it over the fence, call it, Gillian, you lose control. You don't know what happens to that waste. Again, it's the out of sight, out of mind. We've seen the pictures of trucks backing up and just dumping it in the ocean and, incinerating it right on shore. It's a concerning issue. It's a concerning issue for me.
Well, and for a country that prides itself on being a global citizen and wanting to do the right thing.
And being a global leader. That's what Canada needs to be.
In November, Nina took her campaign to Europe in person, where she once again took center stage to remind those with power of the stakes.
As children, we have the right to live in a safe, clean, and healthy environment. So the present generation should not steal our basic rights and endanger the lives of the next generation.
In part of our documentary tonight, we're going to be focusing on quite a remarkable young woman in Indonesia. Her name is Nina. And she has, for years now, been trying to advocate, an activist. I mean, I think you have a lot of time for environmental activists.
I do.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a copy of the letter that she sent to the Prime Minister so you can read it for yourself, and maybe you could just tell us what you think your response would be.
I will make sure she gets a response.
What will the response be?
Well, I will have to read the letter.
It's pretty simple. She's asking for you to stop sending it.
I'll tell her what I told you. We're working towards that goal and to try and achieve it in the shortest possible amount of time.
What would you hope that the Prime Minister would say to your letter?
Not just sorry, stop export their plastic to Indonesia.
Well, we did an interview yesterday, not with the Prime Minister, but we talked to the Minister of the Environment. We showed him your letter. And he said, okay, thank you for the letter. Okay. And he said, I'm going to respond to Nina.
Oh my God.
But he did not say that that Canada would stop exporting. What do you think of that?
Yeah, because they know like where or why, what else. Because they know that recycling is hard, it's difficult and expensive. Maybe they still don't want to leave Indonesia. They still want Indonesia to be a dump site for their waste. Yeah, it's kind of disappointed for me.
What would you say to that minister if he writes to you? What will you tell him?
I really want you to stop export your plastic waste to Indonesia. Just stop.
Itu teman-teman ada.
As for that letter to the Prime Minister, written 2 years ago, she finally got an answer from his office this January, apologizing for the delay and telling her it really was a matter for the Environment Minister. Since we interviewed Minister Guibault, Nina has yet to hear anything.